The story begins with a revelation that forever changes the life of a millionaire. He believed his daughters had died in an accident, but the truth was about to be uncovered. A recently hired housekeeper recognizes the girls in an old photo and reveals she saw them at the orphanage, shaking the millionaire's world. Catherine Kate Myers went unnoticed in the mirrored corridors of the commercial building in Midtown Manhattan, New York. At 32, with a business degree from NYU, she worked at Neotech Solutions, one of the country's largest technology companies. Her position as a senior financial analyst was respectable, but it didn't put her in the spotlight of the bustling New York corporate world. Catherine's routine was filled with spreadsheets, endless meetings, and constant deadlines. For the last 8 months, however, something had changed in her seemingly ordinary life. Edward "Ed" Reynolds, one of New York's most successful entrepreneurs, had crossed her path during a corporate event and, surprisingly, had taken an interest in her. Ed, 38, was the heir to a fortune built in real estate and had multiplied his wealth by investing in tech startups. Refined, educated in international schools, fluent in 4 languages, and the owner of a billion-dollar empire, he seemed to have it all. And for some reason, Catherine was still trying to understand he had chosen her. "You have something rare in this world of appearances, Kate," he would always repeat. "Authenticity." That Friday, Catherine was finishing up her review of some reports when her phone vibrated with a message from Ed. "Meeting ran long. Dinner at 10 p.m. I'll be at the St. Regis Grand." Catherine sighed, checking her watch. It would be another night of waiting. Ed's meetings always ran long, especially when they involved Victoria Price, the brilliant investment director from Neotech's main competitor. Catherine took a deep breath, trying to push away the jealousy that was beginning to eat at her. After all, it was just business. She decided to surprise him. Instead of waiting at home, she would go to the St. Regis Grand to meet him. Maybe she could join the end of the meeting, show interest in his affairs. Lately, she felt she needed to make more of an effort to keep the relationship alive. Catherine stopped by her apartment, changing out of her corporate suit and into a simple and elegant black dress, a gift from Ed. Looking at herself in the mirror, she applied red lipstick. Do I look like myself, she wondered, unsure of when she had started to lose her identity in this relationship. The taxi dropped her off in front of the imposing St. Regis Grand Hotel on the Upper East Side. Catherine greeted the doorman, who already knew her from previous occasions, and headed to the exclusive restaurant on the top floor. Soft jazz music filled the air, and the low lights created an intimate atmosphere among the impeccably dressed patrons. "I'm looking for Mr. Edward Reynolds," she told the maitre d', who nodded discreetly and led her through the dining room. And that's when Catherine saw him. At a secluded table, partially hidden by a dark wooden partition, Ed was leaning in towards Victoria. His fingers were touching her hand on the table, a caress that left no doubt about their shared intimacy. Ed's lips whispered something in the executive's ear, who smiled seductively. Time seemed to freeze. Catherine felt her heart stop for a second, only to start pounding painfully. The maitre d' noticed her discomfort and paused, uncertain. "Miss?" A whirlwind of emotions coursed through Catherine's body. Anger, humiliation, disappointment. She could turn around and leave quietly, preserving what little dignity she had left. She could confront them, creating a scene that would surely become gossip among New York's business elite. But something inside her, a strength she didn't know she possessed, pushed her in another direction. "I'm fine," she replied to the maitre d', regaining her composure. And without hesitation she walked towards the bar, not Ed's table. Sitting alone at the counter, a man was distractedly watching the amber liquid in his glass. He wore simple clothes, almost humble by the standards of the place. His hair was disheveled and he had a 5 o'clock shadow. Still, there was something about him that caught Catherine's attention, a quiet dignity, a presence that needed no ostentation. Without a second thought, Catherine approached, positioning herself next to him. The man looked up, surprised by her approach. He had deep, intense brown eyes that seemed to see right through people. "Forgive me," Catherine said softly. And then, in an impulse that would forever change the course of her life, she leaned in and kissed him. It was a quick but intense kiss. The stranger, initially stunned, didn't pull away. On the contrary, there was a brief moment when his lips responded, as if recognizing something familiar in that unexpected connection. When they parted, Catherine noticed that the entire restaurant had fallen silent. From the corner of her eye, she saw Ed standing, pale as a ghost, his wine glass forgotten in his hand. Victoria, beside him, wore an expression somewhere between shock and perverse amusement. Catherine turned to the man she had just kissed. Their eyes met again, and she saw something she didn't expect: understanding. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" he asked, his voice deep and calming, with a slight accent different from a New Yorker's. "For helping me see the truth." Ed started walking towards her, recovering from the shock. Catherine knew she had to get out of there. She glanced one last time at the stranger at the bar, etching his features into her memory, and then headed for the exit. As she passed Ed, she dodged his attempt to grab her arm. "Kate, wait! It's not what you think." She stopped briefly, facing him with a calmness that surprised them both. "You wanted something exciting, Ed." "So did I." And then, with her head held high, Catherine crossed the room and walked out into the New York night, leaving behind a relationship based on appearances and a version of herself she no longer recognized. What she didn't know was that the kiss, that single moment of rebellion, had been captured by the phone of one of the patrons. And before she even got home, the image was already beginning its viral journey across social media, turning that impulsive act into a scandal that would extend far beyond the walls of the St. Regis Grand. She also didn't know that the man she had kissed was no simple stranger. James J. Allen, as she would later discover, held secrets that would completely transform her life. As the taxi cut through the illuminated avenues of New York, Catherine felt a single tear roll down her face. But strangely, it wasn't a tear of sadness. For the first time in a long time, she felt free. Free to be who she really was, without masks or pretenses. The phone rang several times. It was Ed. She turned the device off and looked out the window. New York, the city that never sleeps, continued its frantic pace outside, indifferent to the small earthquake that had just occurred in her life. "Where to, ma'am?" the taxi driver asked. Catherine thought for a moment. She didn't want to go back to her apartment, where every corner reminded her of Ed. She didn't want to call friends who would inevitably ask questions she didn't have answers for. "To the pier overlooking the Hudson River, please." She needed air, space, silence to reorganize her thoughts. She needed to rediscover who Catherine Myers was without Edward Reynolds, without Neotech, without the expectations she carried on her shoulders. What she couldn't imagine was that, at that very moment, the man she had kissed was also leaving the St. Regis Grand, pensively observing the city that had once been his, before everything fell apart, and that their paths, now connected by an impulsive kiss, were destined to cross again under circumstances neither of them could foresee. The weekend passed in a blur for Catherine. Hiding out at her friend Denise's apartment in Brooklyn, she kept her phone off, immersing herself in a protective silence that allowed her to process her emotions. On Sunday night, however, curiosity got the better of her. When she turned on her phone, a flood of notifications invaded the screen. "Oh my God, Kate!" Denise's voice echoed from the kitchen as she saw her frozen, staring at the phone. "You have no idea what's happening, do you?" Denise approached with her own phone, showing Catherine a video that already had thousands of shares. There she was in the refined setting of the St. Regis Grand, kissing a seemingly scruffy man. The caption read, "When revenge backfires, executive kisses homeless man to provoke millionaire boyfriend." "Homeless?" Catherine murmured in disbelief. The man hadn't looked like he lived on the streets, just simply dressed. This is absurd. On social media, the kiss had become a meme. Some called her a hero for challenging social conventions. Others accused her of using a vulnerable person for petty revenge. Hashtags like "Buck Revenge Kiss" and "Who is the homeless guy" were trending. "There's more," Denise said, hesitant. "Ed is giving interviews to defend himself. He says you misinterpreted a business meeting and had a breakdown." Catherine felt a knot in her stomach. The humiliation was now going public. Her phone wouldn't stop. Messages from friends, family, even colleagues she barely knew. Among the dozens of notifications, a message from her boss at Neotech. "We need to talk. Monday, 8 a.m., my office." The next morning, Catherine took a deep breath before stepping into the mirrored elevator of the corporate building. She wore a grey suit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, like armor against the stairs that would follow her down the hallways. And they came, some curious, some judgmental, a few sympathetic. "Kate," her boss, Rachel Turner, said as soon as she entered the office, "please have a seat." The conversation was brief and painful. Although Rachel tried to sound understanding, the message was clear. The company's image was at stake. "We're in a sensitive period. with the potential international acquisition, Rachel explained. The board suggests you take a few days off until this blows over. Is this a suspension, Rachel? It's a protection, Kate. For you and for the company. Catherine left the office with a 2-week paid leave in hand, and the certainty that her career at Neotech was seriously compromised. In the lobby, she ran into Marion, a colleague from the finance department with whom she occasionally had lunch. Hey, Marion pulled her into a discreet corner. Did you see the internal memo? American Global Investments announced they're buying Neotech. The official presentation of the new CEO is next week. Catherine nodded distractedly. Under any other circumstances, this news would have put her on high alert. After all, acquisitions usually meant restructuring and layoffs, but at that moment it seemed like just another insignificant detail in her crumbling life. In the following days, Catherine alternated between hiding at home and facing the outside world. She cut her hair, adopting a shorter, modern bob that framed her face. She blocked Ed on all platforms, despite the dozens of contact attempts he made, including showing up at her door. You publicly humiliated me, he said in his last attempt before Catherine closed the door. I at least deserved a chance to explain. How would you explain your hand on her waist, Ed? The whispers in her ear. I saw everything. The week passed slowly. Catherine used the time to reevaluate her life, realizing how she had gradually erased herself in her relationship with Ed. She rediscovered simple pleasures like walking through Central Park on sunny mornings, or having a coffee at a bookstore on the Upper West Side without rushing. On Thursday, she received an email from Neotech summoning all employees to the official presentation of the new management team the following Monday. She hesitated, but decided to attend. It was better to face the situation head-on than to fuel more speculation about her emotional state. The weekend was dedicated to strengthening herself for her return. On Sunday night, she carefully prepared the outfit she would wear. A navy blue midi dress, professional yet confident, different from the neutral suits she used to wear. New phase, new Kate, she murmured to the mirror. On Monday, the Neotech auditorium was packed. Catherine chose a discreet seat at the back, exchanging restrained nods with closer colleagues. She noticed the stares and whispers, but maintained an upright posture, her chin slightly raised. Rachel Turner took the stage first, giving a brief introduction about the merger with American Global Investments, an international giant that promised to expand Neotech's horizons. It is with great honor that I introduce the new CEO who will lead this new phase, she announced. The man who walked onto the stage next nearly made Catherine's heart stop. Tall, athletic build, well-cut hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He wore an impeccably tailored Italian suit, but his eyes, those deep brown eyes, were unmistakably the same as the man she had kissed at the St. Regis Grand. Good morning, everyone. His deep voice filled the auditorium. I'm James Allen, the original founder of American Global Investments and the new CEO of the Neotech AGI Group. A murmur rippled through the audience. Catherine felt her legs go weak, grateful she was sitting. The homeless man from the bar was actually one of the most powerful businessmen in the country. It made no sense. James continued with his speech, talking about strategic vision and corporate values, but Catherine could barely process the words. Her mind was in a whirlwind, trying to reconcile the two images, the simple man at the bar and the powerful executive before her. AGI was born from a different vision of doing business, James explained. We believe a company's true value lies in its people, not its numbers. In recent months, I've been on a personal journey of reconnecting with that philosophy, observing firsthand the realities that are usually hidden in boardrooms. Catherine held her breath. Was he referring to his time undercover? Why would a billionaire pretend to be an ordinary person? And why would he have been at the St. Regis Grand on that particular night? At the end of the presentation, Catherine tried to leave discreetly, but she felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Marion. HR is calling for you, she said in a low voice. Something about a meeting with the new management. Catherine's heart raced again. Was this a formal dismissal? Had James Allen recognized her and decided to get rid of the woman who starred in that embarrassing viral video? On the 10th floor, the former president's office had been quickly redesigned. A secretary greeted her with a professional smile. Ms. Myers, Mr. Allen will see you in a moment. 5 minutes later, which felt like an eternity, Catherine was led into the main office. James was standing by the panoramic window, looking out over New York. He turned as she entered. Ms. Catherine Myers, he said, indicating a chair. Please. Catherine sat, maintaining her erect posture, mentally preparing for any scenario. "Mr. Allen, I imagine you're surprised. It would be impossible not to be." A brief smile crossed his lips. "I believe we have a pending conversation, don't we? If you're referring to the incident at the St. Regis Grand, I'd like to apologize. It was an impulsive moment that should never have happened." James watched her for a few moments, as if assessing something beyond her words. "Do you know why I was there, dressed like that?" Catherine shook her head. "AGI was originally my family's company. After my father passed away, I was pushed out of the presidency by an internal maneuver. I spent 6 months living simply, observing how the world really works when your last name and your bank account don't open all the doors." He paused, pouring himself a glass of water. He offered one to Catherine, who declined with a gesture. That night, I was celebrating quietly. I had just closed the deal to regain control of the company. His eyes met hers. "And then a stranger kissed me." Catherine felt her face burn. "It was a terrible mistake. I was hurt," he completed. "I saw the whole scene, even before you walked in. I've known Edward Reynolds for years. We compete in the same market." An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Catherine expected the announcement of her dismissal at any moment, the logical consequence of all this mess. "I read your file," James said finally, surprising her with the change of subject. "Graduated with honors from NYU, specialization in international financial management, 5 years of consistent growth in Neotech's finance department." "Yes, sir. I also heard about your temporary leave." Catherine swallowed hard. "It was suggested I take a few days off after the video went viral." James nodded thoughtfully. Then he opened a folder in front of him. "I have a proposal for you, Ms. Myers." "A proposal?" Catherine repeated, confused. "I need a direct advisor for the transition. Someone who knows Neotech from the inside, but who also has the courage to challenge the status quo when necessary." He smiled slightly. "Someone who isn't afraid to kiss a supposed homeless man in the middle of the St. Regis Grand, perhaps." Catherine stared at him, stunned. "Are you offering me a promotion?" "Why?" "Because in the coming months I'll need someone with a human perspective by my side, someone who sees beyond appearances." Before Catherine could respond, the door opened. Victoria Price walked in, the same woman who had been with Ed at the St. Regis Grand. She wore an impeccable red suit and heels that made her almost as tall as James. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, casting a cold glance at Catherine. "I didn't know you were busy." "Victoria," James greeted her formally. "This is Catherine Myers, my new executive advisor. Catherine, this is Victoria Price, our new director of mergers and acquisitions." Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly, and Catherine understood instantly. Her rival from the St. Regis Grand would now be her colleague, and from the dangerous glint in her eyes, the war was just beginning. The clock on the wall of Catherine's new office read 8:45 p.m. when she finally organized the last reports. 3 weeks had passed since her surprising promotion, and adapting to the new role had proven to be a monumental challenge. As the CEO's direct advisor, she had access to strategic information and participated in high-level meetings, but she also faced the veiled distrust of colleagues who attributed her rise to questionable motives. "Still here?" James's voice from the doorway made her jump. "Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you." "Just finishing up the numbers for the meeting with the Chicago investors," Catherine replied, trying to hide her fatigue. James entered the room, sitting in the chair across from her desk. In recent days, she had noticed he maintained a calculated professional distance, as if wanting to make it clear to everyone that there was nothing but work between them. "I ran into Edward at the Chamber of Commerce event today," James commented casually. Catherine stiffened for a moment, but continued organizing her folders. "I hope it was a productive conversation. He suggested I should be more careful about who I place in strategic positions, said you're too impulsive." An ironic smile appeared on her lips. "I imagine he used less kind words. Actually, he seemed genuinely concerned about you." Catherine finally stopped what she was doing, looking directly at James. "Ed is concerned about his image, not me. If he were really concerned, he wouldn't have been all over Victoria while he was dating me." An awkward silence settled between them. It was the first time they had directly mentioned the incident at the St. Regis Grand since that initial conversation in his office. Speaking of Victoria, James changed the subject. "She presented an interesting merger proposal with the Sterling Group. I want you to analyze the numbers before the board meeting." The Sterling Group? Catherine frowned. Aren't they involved in that money laundering investigation in the South? James raised an eyebrow. I didn't see anything about that in the reports. It's recent. My friend Robert works at the SEC and mentioned it to me informally last week. It's not in the media yet, but there's a confidential inquiry underway. James leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. Interesting that Victoria didn't mention that, considering she conducted the entire preliminary analysis. Maybe she doesn't know, Catherine suggested, though she didn't really believe it. Maybe. James stood up. Go home, Catherine. It's late, and we have a busy day tomorrow. When she finally arrived at her apartment in the West Village, Catherine was exhausted, but her mind couldn't switch off. The mention of the encounter with Ed had disturbed her more than she wanted to admit. She opened a bottle of wine, poured a glass, and sat on her small balcony watching the city lights. Her phone rang, displaying Denise's name on the screen. So, powerful executive, how are things at the top of the corporate food chain? Her friend joked. Complicated, Catherine sighed. Not a day goes by that I don't feel the judgmental stares. Half the company thinks I slept with the boss to get the promotion, and the other half thinks I'm an impulsive lunatic who's going to ruin the company at the first opportunity. Denise laughed. At least no one thinks you're boring. What's it like working with your homeless guy? He wasn't homeless, Denise, and it's challenging. James Allen is intense, demanding. Sometimes it feels like he can read my mind, other times he's completely closed off. But he's hot, right? I saw his pictures in business magazines. If I kissed a stranger and then found out he was a single billionaire, I'd already be planning the wedding. Catherine rolled her eyes even though she was alone. It's not like that. Our relationship is strictly professional. For now, Denise teased. The universe has an interesting sense of humor, don't you think? Of all the men in New York for you to impulsively kiss, you chose your future boss. The conversation with Denise brought some relief, but after hanging up, Catherine's thoughts returned to James's mention of Ed and Victoria's suspicious proposal. Something was wrong with that whole story. The next morning, Catherine arrived at the office early. Taking advantage of the still empty floor, she accessed the internal system to research more about the Sterling Group and the merger proposal. The preliminary documents had all been prepared by Victoria, with numbers that were extremely favorable to the deal. What are you doing? Catherine nearly jumped out of her chair. Victoria was standing in the doorway, watching her with a cold smile. Good morning, Victoria. I'm just reviewing the numbers for the Sterling Group merger, as James requested. Victoria entered the room, closing the door behind her. You know, Catherine, I've been wondering what James saw in you to grant this meteoric promotion. Besides the obvious, of course. Her gaze swept over Catherine, evaluative and dismissive. If you're insinuating there's something unprofessional between us, you're mistaken, Catherine replied, maintaining her composure. Victoria laughed. Please, darling. Everyone saw the video. The kiss with the homeless man that results in a promotion when the homeless man becomes the CEO? Not even a Lifetime movie would dare to create such an absurd storyline. Catherine took a deep breath, controlling her irritation. If you came here to provoke me, Victoria, I'm busy. I have an analysis to finish. I just came to warn you. Victoria leaned her hands on the desk, leaning forward. You're playing in a playground where you don't know the rules. Ed was an easy toy for you, but James Allen is on another level. Men like him aren't impressed by games from a girl from the suburbs. I don't need your advice, thank you. That's a shame. Victoria straightened up. Ed really liked you, you know. That night at the St. Regis Grand, we were discussing business. He had just shown me the engagement ring he'd bought for you. The revelation hit Catherine like a punch to the gut, but she kept her expression neutral. If it was just business, why was his hand on your waist, whispering in your ear? Victoria's smile widened. Because I stumbled and he caught me, and he was whispering because the information was confidential. But I understand your interpretation. Insecure people always see the worst in situations, don't they? When Victoria left, Catherine felt shaken. Was it possible she had misinterpreted everything? That she had destroyed a relationship and created a scandal over a misunderstanding? No, she muttered to herself. That's not what happened. Forcing herself to focus, she returned to analyzing the merger documents. The more she examined the numbers, the stranger they seemed. The profitability projections were unrealistically optimistic, and there was a peculiar clause about the immediate transfer of assets even before the merger was fully completed. Catherine printed the main documents and highlighted the inconsistencies. Then she searched for recent news about the Sterling Group. finding only small mentions of the investigation on specialized financial market websites. The most comprehensive article cited sources from the SEC talking about possible accounting irregularities. At 10 a.m. in the main boardroom, the executive team was assembled to discuss the merger. James presided over the table with Victoria to his right. Catherine sat discreetly at the back of the room, as befitted her position as an advisor. "Before we begin," James said after the initial formalities, "I'd like to hear my advisor's analysis of the proposal. Catherine, please." All eyes turned to her. Victoria looked surprised and annoyed by the unscheduled inclusion. Catherine stood up, distributing copies of her analysis. "Thank you, Mr. Allen. After reviewing the merger proposal with the Sterling Group, I've identified some inconsistencies that deserve attention." She took a deep breath and continued, pointing out the exaggerated projections and the suspicious asset transfer clause. "Even more concerning," she went on, ignoring Victoria's furious glare, "there is preliminary information about an SEC investigation involving possible accounting irregularities at the group. If confirmed, a merger at this time could expose Neotech AGI to significant legal and reputational risks." A murmur went through the room. James watched Catherine intently, his expression unreadable. "This is absurd," Victoria interrupted. "We're talking about baseless rumors. The Sterling Group is a solid company with decades of market reputation. This advisor," she emphasized the word with disdain, "is clearly trying to sabotage a strategic operation for personal reasons." "What reasons would those be, Victoria?" James asked calmly. "Ask her about her relationship with Edward Reynolds and how it ended," Victoria replied with a venomous smile. "Ed is a financial consultant for the Sterling Group. She's trying to harm him personally." Catherine felt her blood run cold. She hadn't known about that connection. "I have no interest in harming Ed," she responded firmly. "My analysis is based solely on the numbers and available information. If I'm wrong, I'll be happy to admit it. But I think it's worth postponing any decision until we have more clarity on this investigation." James considered for a moment, looking from one to the other. "I agree with Catherine. We'll pause the negotiations until we're certain there are no legal risks involved. Rodrigo," he said to the legal director, "I need you to check directly with your contacts at the SEC." The meeting continued, but Catherine could barely concentrate. She felt Victoria's gaze burning into her. At the end, when everyone else was leaving, James asked her to stay. "That was a brave analysis," he said when they were alone. "It was just my job. Victoria won't forget this easily. You've just made a powerful enemy." Catherine met his eyes. "We were already enemies before we were formally introduced." James smiled slightly. "You're right." He hesitated for a moment, as if considering saying something more, but changed his mind. "I need you to prepare a full report on this situation for the board, and Catherine, be careful." The following week, the tension in the office was palpable. Catherine worked longer hours than ever, trying to prove her worth beyond any doubt. The investigation into the Sterling Group became public, confirming her suspicions, and the merger was officially cancelled. One Friday night, long after everyone else had left, Catherine was organizing documents in the file room when she heard raised voices coming from James's office. She immediately recognized them. It was Victoria, and she sounded furious. "You're throwing everything away because of her," she yelled. "I built this deal for months, James. It was perfect. The Sterling Group was going to give us access to the southern market and government contracts." "Perfect for whom, Victoria?" James's voice was calm, but had an underlying hardness. "For Neotech or for you and your friends? Do you think I don't know about your stake in the holding company that controls part of the group?" Catherine froze, holding her breath. She shouldn't be listening, but she couldn't move away now. "I always knew you'd come back to reclaim the company," Victoria continued, her tone now more controlled. "That's why I got close to Ed. I knew you were rivals and that he had valuable information about your moves. The plan was simple. Use his influence to block your buyback of AGI. And his girlfriend? Was she part of the plan too?" "Catherine," Victoria laughed. "At first she was just a way to get closer. The trusting, lovesick girlfriend of the executive, easy to manipulate through him. But then I realized she could be a problem. Too sharp, always asking the right questions. That's why I decided to speed things up that night at the St. Regis Grand. You planned for her to see us together," James concluded, "but you didn't count on the kiss. Who could have predicted that madness? And it would have been even more impossible to guess that the homeless man was you. When I found out, I almost had a heart attack. Catherine felt her heart race. All this time, Victoria had been manipulating the situation. She had used Ed, tried to use her, and was now trying to use James. Think about it, James. Victoria's voice softened, adopting a seductive tone. We can still make this work. I understand this world better than anyone. Together, we could turn Neotech AGI into the largest conglomerate in Latin America. There was a silence. Catherine held her breath. It's over, Victoria, James said finally. On Monday, I'll announce your departure from the company. It will be public that you've stepped down to pursue new challenges. We'll keep your reputation intact as long as everything happens discreetly. You'll regret this. Victoria's voice turned icy. And what about your precious assistant? Do you really think she's with you for your business acumen? The girl is only here because she feels guilty about the scandal she caused, or maybe she's planning her next move. From secretary to the first lady of the Allen Empire, that would be quite a climb, wouldn't it? Catherine couldn't hear James's response, as the sound of heels rapidly approaching the door alerted her. She moved as silently as possible behind a bookshelf, seconds before Victoria stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind her. When she was sure Victoria had left, Catherine emerged from her makeshift hiding place, her mind spinning with everything she had heard. She was about to leave discreetly when the door to James's office opened again. "Catherine," he called, clearly surprised to find her there at that hour. "What are you still doing here?" She hesitated. Should she admit she had heard the conversation? Pretend she had just arrived? Lie? "I heard," she confessed finally, opting for honesty. "Not on purpose. I was in the file room when you started arguing. I heard about Ed, about her plan." James watched her for a long moment, his face an impenetrable mask. Then, to Catherine's surprise, he simply nodded. "Perhaps it's for the best. Come, let's talk in my office. I think it's time we put all the cards on the table." And as she followed him into the president's office, Catherine felt she was about to discover the rest of the story, the part she didn't yet know about the man she had impulsively kissed that night at the St. Regis Grand, and who had now inexplicably become a central part of her life. The president's office was quiet, illuminated only by a desk lamp and the city lights streaming through the panoramic windows. James poured 2 glasses of whiskey, offering one to Catherine, who accepted with a slight nod. "You probably have a lot of questions," he said, sitting not in his presidential chair, but on the sofa in the corner of the room, motioning for her to do the same. Catherine took a small sip of the drink, feeling the liquid warm her throat. "Why were you dressed like that at the St. Regis Grand? Why would one of the richest men in America pretend to be someone else?" James swirled the amber liquid in his glass, contemplative. "My father built AGI from the ground up. He started as a small consulting firm in Pittsburgh and turned it into a multinational corporation. When he got sick, I was already the executive vice president, prepared to take over. What happened? He passed away suddenly, a massive heart attack during a meeting in New York. Before I could even process the loss, a series of documents appeared, supposedly signed by him, transferring control of the company to a board of senior executives, including Victoria." Catherine frowned. "Forgery? Possibly, but the signatures were authenticated and deemed genuine. I was so devastated by the loss that I didn't have the strength for a legal battle. So they voted for my removal, citing emotional instability. And you just accepted it?" A bitter smile crossed his lips. "Not exactly. I realized I needed to understand the machine my father had built, which was now spinning out of control. I decided to step away completely, not just from the company, but from the life I was living. The homeless man from the St. Regis Grand. I didn't end up living on the streets, as the rumors say," James clarified, "but I spent 6 months living simply, using another name, without any privileges. I worked as a waiter, an Uber driver, sold water at traffic lights. I wanted to see the real America, not the filtered version that reaches the boardroom." Catherine watched him with renewed interest. There was a genuine quality to his expression that touched something inside her. "During that time," he continued, "I kept monitoring AGI through allies who remained loyal. I realized that Victoria and her group were steering the company towards questionable deals, compromising my father's legacy. I put together a strategy to regain control. The acquisition of Neotech." James nodded. "AGI needed Neotech's technology to stay competitive. I used intermediaries to negotiate quietly, buying shares on the open market until I had enough of a stake to force changes on the board. That night at the St. Regis Grand, I had just received confirmation that we had succeeded. I was celebrating discreetly when I kissed you," Catherine completed, feeling her face flush. "Of all the people at that bar, I chose you." A faint smile appeared on his face. "The universe has a peculiar sense of humor. Why did you hire me as your advisor? Was it out of pity? Because of the scandal?" James looked at her directly. "I hired you because I needed someone who wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo. Someone who could see beyond appearances and had the courage to act on their convictions, even when it meant going against the tide. Your gesture at the St. Regis Grand demonstrated exactly that." "An impulsive and thoughtless gesture," Catherine argued. "Courageous," James corrected. "Few would have the courage to do what you did, even when feeling betrayed. Most would swallow the humiliation and move on, pretending nothing happened." Catherine reflected on his words, remembering the conversation she had overheard between him and Victoria. She said, "I'm only here because I feel guilty about the scandal, or because of ambition." "And what do you say?" "That I'm here because I believe in my work," she answered firmly. "Because despite the bizarre circumstances that brought us together, I saw in Neotech AGI a chance to do something significant, something bigger than financial reports and spreadsheets, a chance to truly impact people's lives." James watched her for a long moment, as if weighing the sincerity of her words. "That's what impresses me about you, Catherine. Your authenticity." The conversation was interrupted by the ringing of James's phone. He checked the screen and frowned. "I have to take this. It's the board." While he was on the phone, Catherine took the opportunity to look around the room. On the walls, besides the expected diplomas and certifications, there were photographs that told a story. A teenage James next to a middle-aged man with a kind smile, likely his father. James in a community in Appalachia. James at a graduation, helping children from a public school. These weren't the typical photos of an executive posing with celebrities or politicians, but images that revealed a human side, rarely seen in the corporate world. "Sorry about that," James said as he hung up. "Trouble with nervous investors after the cancellation of the merger with the Sterling Group. Should I be worried? No. We just need to quickly find another path for expansion in the South." He hesitated for a moment. "Actually, I have an idea, but I'd need your help to develop it." Catherine sat up straighter, immediately alert. "What idea?" "Instead of seeking established partners, what if we invested directly in local startups? Small innovative companies that know the regional market but need capital and structure to grow." Catherine's eyes lit up with interest. "An innovation hub in the South? That could work. We'd have to map the local entrepreneurial ecosystem, identify promising startups, create an accelerator program." "Exactly what I was thinking." James smiled, genuinely excited. "Could you lead this project?" "I know it's far beyond your current duties, but I'd love to," Catherine replied without hesitation. "I can start researching immediately and present a preliminary plan next week." They spent the next hour discussing the initial details of the project, and Catherine felt an energy she hadn't experienced in a long time. It wasn't just the professional challenge, but something more. The feeling of building something meaningful, something that could truly change lives. "It's getting late," James observed finally. "We should go home." Catherine nodded, gathering her things. As they walked to the elevator together, a comfortable silence settled between them. In the building's lobby, James asked, "Where do you live?" "West Village, it's not far from here. Can I offer you a ride? My driver is waiting." Catherine hesitated. Accepting could fuel even more rumors at the company. On the other hand, it was past 11 p.m. and taxis would be scarce. "Thank you, I accept." In the luxurious car, sitting side by side, Catherine realized how James's physical proximity affected her. There was something magnetic about him, something that went beyond his position or wealth, an intensity, a presence that filled the space around him. "About Ed," James said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Has he been trying to talk to you?" Catherine was surprised by the question. "He tried a few times in the first few weeks, but eventually gave up." "Why?" "He approached me today. Said he needed to clear things up with you, that it was all a misunderstanding." Catherine's heart quickened. "And you believe that?" James turned to face her. "It doesn't matter what I believe. What matters is what you feel." "I saw what I saw," Catherine replied, looking away at the city passing by the window. "Even if there was nothing between them on that specific night, something was happening. Ed was never good at hiding his emotions." "Like you," James observed. Catherine smiled slightly. Yeah, I suppose so. I'm not very good with masks. It's refreshing, he said. In this world of calculated smiles and networking strategies, your honesty is rare. The car stopped in front of Catherine's building. Before the driver could get out to open the door, James opened it himself. Thank you for the ride, and for the conversation, Catherine said, feeling strangely nervous. See you Monday, James replied. He hesitated for a moment, as if wanting to say something more, but just smiled. Get some rest. Next week will be intense. Catherine watched the car drive away before entering her building. In her apartment, she dropped her bag on the sofa and walked to the balcony looking out at the city. She felt different, as if the conversation with James had changed something fundamental inside her. Her phone rang. It was a message from Ed. We need to talk. Please, Kate, you deserve to know the whole truth. She stared at the message for long moments, her thumb hovering over the screen. Finally, she replied, There's nothing to say, Ed. We've moved on. She blocked the number then and returned to the balcony. New York stretched out before her, vast and full of possibilities. Somehow she felt she was on the threshold of something important, something that would transform her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The following weeks were intense. Catherine immersed herself completely in the Innovation Hub project for the South, conducting research, contacting local leaders, and mapping the entrepreneurial ecosystem in states like Georgia, North Carolina, and Tennessee. Victoria's departure was announced exactly as James had planned, an amicable separation to pursue new challenges. But behind the scenes at Neotech AGI, everyone knew there was more to the story than the official statement suggested. With Victoria out of the way, Catherine gained more space and visibility. Her project was presented to the board and approved with enthusiasm, granting her a dedicated team and a budget for an initial exploratory trip to Atlanta, where the hub would first be established. Her relationship with James evolved in a complex way. Professionally, they formed a solid partnership, she with her detail-oriented and practical approach, he with his strategic experience and long-term vision. Personally, they maintained a cautious distance, aware of the rumors any closer association might generate. But there were moments, a look that lingered longer than necessary, a hand that lightly touched an arm during a conversation, a shared smile in tense meetings that suggested something more, something unsaid that floated between them. On the eve of her trip to Atlanta, Catherine was working late in her office, finalizing the last details, when James appeared at the door. I thought you'd have gone home to pack by now, he commented. I want to make sure everything is perfect for tomorrow, Catherine replied, smiling tiredly. First official presentation of the project, I can't fail. James came in, sitting in the chair across from her desk. You won't fail. This project has your mark on every detail. Our mark, she corrected. It was your idea, after all. An idea is just a seed. You built the entire greenhouse around it. Catherine smiled at the compliment. Thank you for trusting me with this. It means a lot. It means a lot to me, too, James said, his tone more personal than usual. Seeing my father's legacy honored this way, not through questionable deals like Victoria wanted, but through something that will truly impact lives. Do you think she'll try something? Catherine asked, voicing a concern that had been growing since the executive's departure. Victoria doesn't seem like the type to accept defeat easily. Probably, James admitted, but we're prepared. The legal department is keeping an eye on any suspicious moves, and financial controls have been strengthened. Catherine nodded, though she didn't feel entirely at ease. Ever since the argument she'd overheard, she had the impression that Victoria had more cards up her sleeve than they realized. By the way, James said, changing the subject, I've decided I'm going with you to Atlanta tomorrow. Catherine looked at him, surprised. I thought you had commitments here. Nothing that can't be rescheduled. This project is a priority, and I want to be there for the launch. He hesitated for a moment. Besides, it's been a while since I visited Atlanta. My father was born there, you know. No, I didn't know, Catherine replied, realizing how little she still knew about James's personal life, despite their growing professional closeness. He came from a simple neighborhood on the outskirts of Atlanta and built an empire, James recounted, a note of pride in his voice. He never forgot his roots. He always said our greatest privilege was being able to give back. That's what we're doing with this project, isn't it? Giving back. James nodded, a flicker of emotion in his usually reserved eyes. Exactly. That's why it's so important to me. They looked at each other for a long moment, a mutual understanding passing silently between them. Catherine felt something shift in the air, a subtle tension that made her heart race. "Well," James finally stood up, "we should go home. The flight is early tomorrow." "Yes," Catherine agreed, starting to pack up her documents. "See you at the airport." As she was about to leave, James stopped at the door. "Catherine." "Yes?" "Thank you. For everything." The simplicity and sincerity of those words touched her deeply. "There's nothing to thank me for." After he left, Catherine sat for a few more minutes, processing the conversation. There was something in James's eyes when he spoke of his father, something vulnerable that contrasted with his usual composure. For the first time, she glimpsed the man behind the CEO, the son who still carried the weight of loss and betrayal, and to her surprise, she found that she wanted to know more of this man, far beyond the corporate corridors of Neotech AGI. The next morning, as the plane took off for Atlanta, Catherine looked at James, sitting beside her reviewing documents. The trip they were taking together would be just the beginning of a journey far greater than either of them could imagine, a journey that would lead them not only to rebuild a corporate empire, but also to rediscover parts of themselves they had forgotten existed. The taxi weaved through the avenues of Atlanta as Catherine watched the city from the window. The contrast between the traditional and the modern created a unique landscape. On one side, historic neighborhoods with their classic Southern architecture. On the other, Tech Square, one of the country's main technology hubs. "Is this your first time visiting Atlanta?" asked James, who seemed more relaxed than usual, his tie slightly loosened and the top buttons of his shirt undone. "Yes. I only knew it from pictures and presentations," Catherine replied. "It's more vibrant than I imagined." "Wait until you see the sunset from a rooftop bar overlooking the skyline," he commented with a nostalgic smile. "Or try an authentic slice of pecan pie from a lady at the Ponce City Market." The way he spoke with genuine affection revealed a connection to the place that went beyond childhood memories. It was as if part of his essence had been shaped by these streets. "Did you come here often as a child?" Catherine asked. "Every summer. My father made sure I knew my roots." James looked out the window, his eyes catching details only he could see, memories of a simpler time. "Over there," he pointed to an old building, "was his first hardware store before it all began." Catherine followed his gaze, trying to imagine a young entrepreneur dreaming of the future, unaware he would build an empire. They arrived at the hotel, a sophisticated establishment with a view of the city. The receptionist greeted them with characteristic Southern hospitality, handing them key cards for executive suites on different floors. "Get some rest," James suggested. "We'll meet for lunch at 1 p.m. and then we have the first meeting at Tech Square at 3 p.m. Catherine nodded, picking up her suitcase. As she was about to head to the elevator, James added, "And Catherine, thank you for being here. This project means a lot to me." She smiled, feeling an inexplicable wave of warmth at the sincerity in his voice. "It's an honor to be a part of it." In her room, Catherine took a quick shower and changed from her travel clothes into a light dress, more suitable for Atlanta's warm climate, but still formal enough for the meetings. While organizing her documents for the presentation, she received a notification on her phone, a message from Denise with a link to an article in a major New York Society column. "Look what your friend is up to," the message read. Catherine opened the link and felt her stomach sink. The article showed photos of Ed and Victoria together at a charity event, clearly as a couple. The caption suggested the romance had begun long before the famous incident at the St. Regis Grand, implying that Catherine had been the last to know about a betrayal that was already common knowledge. But what truly disturbed her was a brief comment attributed to Victoria. "We are planning big news for the corporate market. Let's just say certain companies might be in for a surprise in the coming days." The enigmatic and vaguely threatening tone of the statement left Catherine uneasy. Was Victoria planning something against Neotech AGI? Against James? Or was it just an empty provocation? She decided not to mention the article to James, at least not before the important meetings they had that day. She didn't want personal worries to interfere with the project they had both been so dedicated to. For lunch, James surprised her by taking her not to a fancy restaurant, as one might expect, but to a small, classic Southern diner in a residential neighborhood. "Best food in Atlanta," he assured her, "and Mrs. Josephine has the best stories about how this city has changed over the last 50 years. Indeed, the friendly, gray-haired woman who greeted them seemed to have known James for years, treating him not as the powerful businessman he was, but as the boy who used to run around there on vacation. "Jay, honey, it's been too long," she exclaimed, hugging him with genuine affection. "Your father would be so proud to see the man you've become." Catherine watched the interaction with interest, seeing a side of James that rarely revealed itself in New York. Here, away from corporate pressures, he seemed lighter, more authentic. During lunch, which consisted of delicious fried chicken and collard greens, Mrs. Josephine told stories about James's father, about how he always came back to help the community, even after becoming successful. "He never forgot where he came from," the woman said, emotion in her eyes. "He always said, wealth only has value when it's shared." "That's what we want to do with the new project, Mrs. Josephine," James explained. "Create opportunities for young entrepreneurs from here, so they don't have to leave their roots to find a chance in New York or overseas." The elderly woman nodded in approval. "That's honoring your father the right way, son." Catherine was deeply touched by the scene. She understood in that moment that the Innovation Hub project was much more than a business strategy for James. It was a way to reconnect with his origins and his father's legacy. After lunch, they headed to Tech Square, where they were received by representatives of the local government and young entrepreneurs already established in the Tech Hub. The meeting was productive, with genuine enthusiasm from everyone involved. Catherine's presentation, detailing how the initiative would work, was met with applause. "The idea is to establish not just an office, but a complete center for fostering innovation," she explained. "We'll have mentorship programs, seed funding for promising startups, and an incubator for early-stage ideas. And most importantly," James added, "everything will be developed with a focus on local needs and potential. We don't want to impose a New York vision of business, but create something that truly makes sense for Atlanta and the South." At the end of the meeting, a group of young entrepreneurs invited them to see some of the startups already operating in Tech Square. The excitement was contagious, and Catherine felt energized by the atmosphere of innovation and possibility. "It's incredible to see so much talent," she commented to James as they visited a startup focused on renewable energy solutions. "Imagine the potential if they have the right support." "That's exactly the point," he replied, his enthusiasm evident. "America doesn't have a shortage of talent, just of structured opportunities. That's what we want to change." The afternoon extended into visits and conversations, and when they finally left Tech Square, it was early evening. The Atlanta sky was beginning to be painted with the orange hues James had mentioned earlier. "Do we still have time to see that sunset you mentioned?" Catherine asked. "We do," James smiled. "In fact, I have the perfect place for it." Instead of returning to the hotel, James asked the driver to take them to a rooftop bar with a panoramic view of the city. They found a quiet corner, the skyline spread out before them. "I used to come up to places like this with my dad in the late afternoons," James recounted. "He said this was when the city showed its true soul." Catherine watched the sky transform into a spectacle of colors, orange, pink, violet, reflecting off the glass of the skyscrapers in a mesmerizing dance. "I understand now," she said softly. "What? Why this project means so much to you. It's not just about business or expansion. It's about honoring your roots, your father's legacy." James looked at her with an intensity that seemed both surprised and touched by her perception. "Few people understand that. Maybe because few people know you beyond the CEO." A comfortable silence settled between them, filled only by the distant sounds of the city. For a moment, they were no longer boss and advisor. They were just two people sharing something genuine. "Catherine," James said finally, "there's something I need to tell you." The serious tone in his voice alarmed her. "What's wrong?" "I got a call from the legal department while you were meeting with the developers. Victoria is making moves against us." Catherine's heart raced, remembering the article she had seen earlier. "What kind of moves?" "She and Ed have formed a partnership with the Sterling Group. They're trying to raise capital for a hostile takeover bid for Neotech AGI shares. Is that possible?" "Technically, yes, though it's difficult. They'd need to convince a lot of shareholders. But Victoria knows our weak points, our financial vulnerabilities, and Ed has powerful connections in the market." Catherine processed the information, feeling a mix of anger and concern. "What can we do?" "For now, we stick to our plans. This project in Atlanta is part of our strengthening strategy. The more we solidify our position as innovators committed to social impact, the harder it will be for them to paint the company as a mere asset to be traded." Catherine nodded, but something still bothered her. "There's more, isn't there?" James hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. They're using our proximity as part of their narrative, implying that your promotion and this project are the result of a personal involvement, not professional merit. Catherine felt her face burn with indignation. Of course they are. It's the only way they have to diminish the work we're doing. I don't want this to affect your professional reputation, James said, concern evident in his voice. My reputation is based on my work, not on gossip, she replied with more confidence than she actually felt. If they want to play dirty, let them. We'll keep doing what's right. The sun finally disappeared below the horizon, leaving only a residual glow in the sky that quickly darkened. They started to head back when Catherine's heel caught on a crack in the pavement. James grabbed her arm, preventing her from falling. The touch, though brief, sent an electric current through Catherine's body. For a moment they stood like that, too close, his hand still on her arm, their eyes connected in a silence charged with unsaid possibilities. Thank you, she murmured. James slowly released her arm but didn't step back. Catherine, The shrill ring of his cell phone broke the moment. James checked the screen with a frustrated expression. It's the legal department again. I have to take this. As he stepped a few feet away to talk, Catherine tried to calm her racing heart. What was happening between them? Was it just the emotion of the moment, the beauty of the place, or was something deeper developing? James returned with a grave expression. Victoria gave an explosive interview. It's on the homepage of the country's most important financial news site. What did she say? Catherine asked, dreading the answer. Basically, that the current management of Neotech AGI is compromising the company's value with charity projects with no clear financial return, that we're wasting resources on social experiments while ignoring real market opportunities. She's talking about the Innovation Hub, Catherine concluded, feeling a wave of anger. She's trying to sabotage the project before it even officially begins. Exactly. And the investors? How have they reacted? We've already received a few concerned calls. The stock value dropped 3% in the last few hours. Catherine took a deep breath, trying to organize her thoughts. We need to respond. We can't let this narrative take hold. I agree. Let's go back to the hotel and prepare a communication strategy. We'll show how social impact projects can also be profitable in the long run. On the way back, the relaxed atmosphere from before had vanished, replaced by a palpable tension. In the hotel lobby, as they were about to part ways toward their respective rooms, Catherine lightly touched James's arm. We're going to win this, she said with determination. We won't let Victoria and Ed destroy something so important. James looked at her intensely, gratitude and something deeper in his eyes. Thank you for being by my side through all of this. Always, she replied, and realized she truly meant it, not just as an advisor but on a much more personal level. In the elevator, alone with her thoughts, Catherine reflected on how drastically her life had changed in just a few months. From an ordinary financial analyst to the CEO's direct advisor, embroiled in a high-stakes corporate battle. From a betrayed woman to someone starting to feel something new, something yet unnamed, for a man she had met under the most unlikely circumstances. Upon entering her room, she found a small package on the bed. Inside was a slice of artisanal pecan pie with a handwritten card. To sweeten even the most bitter days. J. The simple gesture, so far from the ostentation she might expect from a billionaire, touched her deeply. It was a reminder that behind the powerful CEO there was a man with childhood memories and small gestures of affection. Catherine sat on the bed, savoring the traditional dessert and thinking about the day she'd had. The stories about James's father, the project they had presented, the almost moment on the rooftop, and now the threats they faced. Her phone rang. It was a message from Ed. Kate, I need to warn you about something. Victoria is going too far. She's planning something dangerous. Meet me, please. Catherine looked at the message with suspicion. Was it genuine concern or more manipulation? After everything that had happened, how could she ever trust Ed again? She decided not to reply immediately. She needed to focus on the current crisis, on the strategy to protect the project and the company's reputation. Personal complications would have to wait. But as she prepared for sleep, she couldn't stop thinking about the look in James's eyes on the rooftop, the unspoken words, the connection that seemed to grow between them with each passing day. And she wondered if, amidst all this corporate turmoil, there was room for something more, something neither of them had planned when their paths crossed on that fateful night at the St. Regis Grand. The last image in her mind before falling asleep was of the Atlanta sunset, with its intense and transformative colors, just like the feelings that were beginning to blossom in her heart. The return to New York was tense. During the flight, Catherine and James worked intensely on a communications strategy to neutralize Victoria's attack. The Atlanta Innovation Hub was not just a charity project, as she had called it, but a solid business initiative with the potential for significant medium and long-term returns. "We need concrete data," Catherine said, reviewing spreadsheets on her laptop. "Projections, similar case studies, success stories from other markets." "I've already asked the finance team to prepare a full report," James replied. "But numbers alone aren't enough. We need a compelling narrative." Catherine nodded. "A story that shows how social impact and financial return can go hand in hand." In the days that followed, the Neotech AGI headquarters transformed into a crisis operations center. While the communications team worked on the official response, Catherine delved into research and analysis to strengthen the case for the Innovation Hub. A week after their return from Atlanta, the company held a press conference. In the packed auditorium, James took the stage with Catherine and other directors. His posture was confident, unshakable. "Recently, questions have been raised about our expansion strategy in the South," he began. "Some have suggested we are prioritizing social projects over financial results. Today we want to show why that is a false dichotomy." Catherine presented the data, how similar innovation hubs had generated impressive returns in other regions, how the proposed business model included equity stakes in promising startups, how a presence in the South would open new markets for Neotech AGI's products and services. "We are not choosing between doing good and doing good business," James concluded. "We are choosing to do good business that also does good. This is the vision that guided my father when he founded AGI, and it is the vision that will continue to guide this company under my leadership." The presentation was well received. The stock, which had fallen after Victoria's interview, began to slowly recover. Key investors publicly expressed their support for the company's direction. At the end of that day, Catherine was organizing documents in her office when Marion, the colleague from the finance department who had become an ally, knocked on her door. "Kate, I need to show you something," she said, entering and closing the door. "I was reviewing the financial reports from the last 2 years and found some strange inconsistencies." Catherine frowned. "What kind of inconsistencies?" "Transfers to external consulting firms without clear specification of services. They started small but gradually increased." Marion placed a folder on the desk. "All approved by Victoria." Catherine examined the documents, feeling a chill of apprehension. "How much in total?" "Almost $18 million. "My God!" Catherine looked at Marion. "Have you told anyone about this?" "Only you. I thought it best to be discreet, considering who's involved." "You did the right thing. They'll take this directly to James." After Marion left, Catherine studied the documents in detail. The transfers had been skillfully disguised as legitimate expenses, but they formed a clear pattern when analyzed together. All were directed to shell companies that, after a quick internet search, appeared to have no real activity. Catherine gathered the evidence and went to James's office. He was on the phone when she entered, but motioned for her to wait. After ending the call, he asked, "Did something happen? You look worried." "I think we've discovered why Victoria is so determined to regain control of the company," Catherine replied, placing the documents on his desk. "She needs to cover this up." James examined the papers with growing concern. "Embezzlement," he murmured. "Classic and efficient. It's almost 18 million, and probably more hidden in other ways we haven't identified yet." James leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "This explains a lot. The resistance to my return, the insistence on the merger with the Sterling Group, which would have likely helped cover up the embezzlement amidst the post-merger financial restructuring," Catherine completed. "Exactly." James stood up, walking to the window. "This changes everything. Now we have concrete evidence against her. Should we involve the legal department?" "The police?" James thought for a moment. "Not yet. We need to gather more proof, build a solid case. Victoria has powerful connections. We can't make a single misstep. Meanwhile, she continues to try to sabotage the company. That's why we need to act quickly. I want a full but discreet audit. Can we trust Marion to lead it?" Catherine nodded. "Completely. She's the one who found these inconsistencies on her own initiative." "Perfect. Put together a small team with her, people you completely trust. I want a full report in 1 week." As Catherine was leaving, James called her again. "Catherine, thank you. Your commitment to the company, to our project. It means a lot. There was something in the way he said our project that made Catherine's heart beat a little faster. It's important to me too, she replied simply. The following days were intense. Catherine divided her time between supervising the secret audit and preparing for the official launch of the Atlanta Innovation Hub, scheduled for the end of the month. The exhaustion was starting to take its toll, but the determination to protect the project she believed in kept her motivated. One Friday night, when almost everyone had left the office, Catherine was still working in her office. A light knock on the door interrupted her concentration. "Still here?" James asked, entering with 2 cups of coffee. "Just organizing the final details for the inauguration in Atlanta," she replied, gratefully accepting the coffee. James sat down across from her. "How's the audit going?" "Progressing. Marion has already found more evidence. Victoria was meticulous, but not meticulous enough. And you? How are you?" The question, more personal than professional, caught Catherine by surprise. "Me? I'm fine. Tired, but fine. You haven't stopped since we got back from Atlanta. You barely go out for lunch. You're always the first to arrive and the last to leave," says the workaholic who's bringing me coffee at 9 o'clock on a Friday night, she retorted with a small smile. James laughed, a rare and pleasant sound. "Touché." A comfortable silence settled between them. Catherine realized how accustomed they had become to each other's presence, how they could work in sync without needing words. "I've been thinking a lot about Atlanta," James said finally, "about the sunset on the rooftop, the conversation we had." Catherine felt a slight blush creep up her neck. "Me too. There was something I wanted to say in that moment before we were interrupted." Catherine's heart sped up. "And what was that?" James seemed to choose his words carefully. "That you've changed my perspective, Catherine. When I regained control of AGI, I was focused on revenge, on proving I was right. But you showed me something different. A way to honor my father's legacy through constructive actions, not resentment." The sincerity in his voice touched Catherine deeply. "You've changed my life too, James. You gave me an opportunity when many only saw scandal and impulsiveness." Their eyes met, and for a moment the office, the company, the problems, everything disappeared. There was only them, 2 people who had found each other under the most unlikely circumstances, and who together were building something significant. James leaned forward slightly, as if to say something more intimate, when Catherine's phone rang. She checked the screen with a sigh of frustration. It was Ed again. "You don't have to answer," James said, noticing her expression. "It's Ed," she replied frankly. "He's been calling insistently for the past few days." A shadow crossed James's face. "I see. Have you been talking?" "No. I blocked his number after the incident at the St. Regis Grand, but he keeps trying from other phones. He says he needs to warn me about something important." "And you believe that?" Catherine hesitated. "I don't know. Ed has always been manipulative, but I also can't imagine him participating in something truly criminal, like what Victoria did." "People can surprise you," James observed. "Not always for the better." The phone stopped ringing, only to start again seconds later. Catherine hesitated, then answered, putting it on speaker. "Ed, I need you to stop calling." "Kate, please listen to me." His voice sounded urgent. "You're in danger. Victoria found out about the internal audit. She knows you're investigating the transfers." Catherine exchanged an alarmed look with James. "How do you know that?" "Because she told me. She's furious, Catherine. She said she's going to end you both before you can expose her. You don't know Victoria like I do. She has no limits." "Why are you telling me this? Aren't you partners now?" Catherine asked, skeptical. "I never wanted to be part of this. When I found out about the embezzlement, I tried to back out, but Victoria has compromising information about me. I'm stuck in this situation." James, who had been listening silently, leaned towards the phone. "What exactly is Victoria planning, Ed?" There was a surprised pause on the other end of the line. "James, you're there?" "I am, and I'm asking what your business partner plans to do." "She's going to leak false information about you two to the press. Forged documents suggesting the embezzled money went to offshore accounts in Catherine's name. She's preparing a dossier to give to journalists and the board on Monday." Catherine felt her blood run cold. "That's absurd. Any serious investigation would prove it's a lie." "Yes, eventually, but the damage would already be done, the doubt planted, the Atlanta hub cancelled. And while you were busy defending yourself, Victoria would move forward with her takeover bid with the insecure shareholders." "Why are you telling us this, Ed?" James asked, clearly suspicious. Because she went too far, Ed replied, his voice filled with what sounded like genuine regret. And because, despite everything, I still care about Kate. What happened at the St. Regis Grand? It wasn't what it looked like. Catherine interrupted. That doesn't matter now. What matters is that we have until Monday to stop Victoria from destroying everything. You need to find the definitive proof of the embezzlement before she does. I know where to look. There's a private server she uses off the corporate network. All the real transactions are documented there. And how would we get access to that? James asked. I can help, but we need to meet in person. It's too risky to talk on the phone. Catherine and James exchanged glances. There was the obvious risk of a trap, but also the possibility of finally gathering enough evidence to stop Victoria. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Central Park, Catherine said finally, near the Museum of Modern Art. It's public enough to be safe. I'll be there, Ed replied, then hung up. A tense silence filled the room. Catherine looked at James, trying to read his expression. Do you think he's being sincere? She asked. I don't know, James admitted. It could be genuine regret, or more manipulation. But we have to consider that Victoria really did find out about the audit and is preparing a counterattack. So, what do? We go to the meeting, but we go prepared. I'll have the security team monitor discreetly, and we'll accelerate the audit, work through the weekend if necessary. Catherine nodded, feeling the weight of the situation. Suddenly it wasn't just about protecting a corporate project, but their own reputations and careers. We should go home and get some rest, James suggested, standing up. Tomorrow will be a decisive day. Catherine agreed, starting to gather her things. As they were about to leave, James stopped near the door. Catherine, he said in a serious tone, regardless of what happens, I want you to know that I trust you. Completely. The sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. I trust you too, James. And we'll get through this together. The look they exchanged contained much more than words could express. A bond forged through challenges, built on mutual respect, and, as was becoming increasingly clear to both of them, something that deepened with each passing day. They left the building side by side, walking to the parking garage where James's driver was waiting. The New York night was strangely calm, as if the city itself was holding its breath before the coming storm. Can I give you a ride? James offered. Thanks, but I've already called an Uber. It should be here any minute. James nodded, though he seemed reluctant to leave her. Be careful, Catherine, and let me know when you get home. You too, she replied, touched by the concern in his voice. As James's car pulled away, Catherine remained in the garage waiting for her driver. The night was pleasantly cool, a rare moment of calm in New York. Her phone vibrated with a notification. The driver had cancelled the ride. She sighed, requesting another one. While she waited, she couldn't stop thinking about the conversation with Ed and Victoria's threats. If what he said was true, they had only 2 days to gather enough proof before Victoria launched her attack. The second driver also cancelled, which was unusual for that time of night. Catherine frowned, a slight unease settling in her mind. She decided to call Denise and ask her friend to pick her up. I'm on my way, Denise said. Stay inside the building until I get there, just in case. Catherine went back into the building's lobby, where the night security guard, Mr. Joseph, was making his rounds. Working late, Ms. Myers. You know it, Mr. Joseph. Complicated days. You're the last one to leave. Even Mr. Allen has already gone. Catherine nodded, checking her phone again. Denise was 10 minutes away. As she waited, she walked through the empty lobby, her footsteps echoing on the polished marble. Ed's words resonated in her mind. You don't know Victoria like I do. She has no limits. A subtle noise made her turn. Nothing, just the normal hum of the air conditioning. Catherine laughed at her own paranoia. Of course, Victoria was dangerous in a corporate sense, but to pose a physical threat was a huge leap. Her cell phone rang. It was James. Did you get a car? He asked, concern evident in his voice. Denise is coming to get me. The Uber drivers are cancelling for some reason. Strange, James commented. Do you want me to come back and pick you up? No need, she's almost here. Catherine hesitated for a moment. James, do you really think Victoria would be capable of going that far? Forging documents to frame me? After discovering the embezzlement, I think she'd be capable of anything to protect herself. A chill ran down Catherine's spine. I'll be careful. Good. And about tomorrow? Would you prefer we go to the meeting with Ed together? That would be better, she replied. We can meet an hour before to align our strategy. Perfect. I'll call you in the morning. He paused. Catherine? Yes? Take care, really. There was something in his voice, a concern that went beyond professional, that warmed Catherine's heart. You too. When she hung up, she saw the headlights of Denise's car through the glass doors. She said goodbye to Mr. Joseph and quickly went outside. Whoa, what's with the face? Denise asked as soon as Catherine got in the car. You look like you've seen a ghost. Something like that, Catherine replied, briefly recounting the latest events as they drove away from Midtown. So that jerk Ed now says he wants to help you? Denise shook her head in disbelief. And you believe him? I don't know what to believe, Denise, but if he's telling the truth about Victoria's plans, we can't ignore it. What if it's a trap? Catherine sighed. That's why James is going with me tomorrow, and the security team will be watching. Denise gave her a meaningful look. James, huh? Getting pretty chummy with the billionaire boss, aren't we? Catherine rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress a small smile. Don't start. It's a professional relationship. Sure. And that almost kiss on the rooftop in Atlanta was also professional. How did you... You told me, you goof. After 3 glasses of wine last week. Catherine blushed. She had opened up to her friend about her confused feelings for James, about how their relationship was evolving into something beyond professional, even though they both maintained a cautious distance. It's complicated, she said finally. We're in the middle of a corporate battle. It's not the time for whatever this is. Life doesn't wait for the perfect moment, Kate. Sometimes things just happen in the middle of chaos. Like the kiss at the St. Regis Grand, Catherine thought, an impulse that had completely changed the course of her life. When she arrived at her apartment, Catherine thanked her friend and promised to call after the meeting with Ed the next day. In the elevator, she checked her messages. There was one from James. Did you get home safe? The simplicity of the question, the genuine concern, brought a smile to her lips. She replied quickly, Yes, I'm home. Thanks for worrying. In her apartment, Catherine took a long shower, trying to relax her tense muscles. Afterward, she made some tea and sat on the balcony, watching the city at night. New York never slept, and neither did her mind, which kept replaying the recent events. She thought of Ed, of how she had believed they would build something together, of how she had been deceived. She thought of Victoria, of her cold and calculating determination. And she thought of James, the man she had met as a simple stranger in a bar, the powerful CEO he now was, and the complex person, with childhood memories and deep values, whom she was beginning to truly know. Her phone vibrated with a new message. She hoped it was James again, but it was an unknown number. Be careful who you trust. Not everything is what it seems. Tomorrow, come early. We need to talk alone. Catherine's heart raced. The message was unsigned, but it could only be from Ed. Why did he want to meet her alone? Was it truly confidential information or a trap? She hesitated, considering whether to tell James. Finally, she decided it would be best to tell him in the morning. She didn't want to alarm him in the middle of the night, and she needed time to think about how to handle the situation. She fell asleep with difficulty, her restless dreams filled with forged documents, accusations in newspaper headlines, and the image of Victoria laughing as everything fell apart. In the dream, James looked at her with disappointment, as if he too believed the lies. She woke up early, feeling less rested than she would have liked. She had a strong coffee and dressed carefully. Dark jeans, comfortable sneakers, a light blouse and a jacket, clothes that would allow for movement if needed. Not that she expected any physical confrontation, but paranoia was starting to creep into her thoughts. At 8:30 a.m., James called. Good morning. Did you sleep well? He asked. More or less, Catherine admitted. James, I got a strange message last night. It was from an unknown number, but I think it was Ed. He wants to meet me earlier, alone. There was a silence on the other end of the line. You're not going, right? I thought I should hear what he has to say. Catherine, this has all the elements of a trap. Why couldn't he talk to both of us together? Maybe he has information he only wants to share with me. Ed was always private and, well, you two never got along. James sighed audibly. I don't like this. At least let me be nearby, watching from a distance. I don't know if that's a good idea. If he sees you, he might not say anything. We're talking about Victoria Price, Catherine. A woman who embezzled millions from the company and is now about to ruin your reputation. We can't take any risks. Catherine thought for a moment. James was right. It was reckless to meet Ed alone, especially after Victoria's veiled threats. Okay, you're right. Let's do this. I'll get there at 9:30. You stay at a safe distance. If I think everything is okay after talking to him, I'll give you a signal and you can approach. That sounds like a reasonable plan, James agreed, still visibly concerned. I'll be there at 9:15, and Catherine, be careful. Always. Catherine arrived at Central Park punctually at 9:30 a.m. The Saturday morning was pleasant, with families and athletes enjoying the green space. She walked to the agreed-upon spot near the Museum of Modern Art, looking around attentively. She saw Ed sitting on a nearby bench, wearing casual clothes and sunglasses. He looked nervous, constantly checking his watch and looking around as if he feared being watched. "Ed," Catherine called, approaching cautiously. He stood up quickly, relief evident on his face. "Kate, you came. I was starting to think you'd changed your mind. What did you want to tell me that couldn't be said in front of James?" Ed looked around again before answering in a low voice. "It's not safe here. Let's walk a bit." Catherine hesitated. Moving away from the meeting point would make it harder for James to watch. "I'd rather stay here. It's a public, safe place." "Please, Kate. What I have to tell you is decomplicated and personal." Against her better judgment, Catherine nodded and started walking beside him, staying in an open, visible area. "Victoria isn't alone in this embezzlement scheme," Ed began. "There are others involved, powerful people." "Who?" "Members of AGI's old board. Some still with the company." Ed seemed genuinely disturbed. When James was pushed out after his father's death, it wasn't just a corporate maneuver. It was a planned conspiracy. Catherine frowned. "What do you mean by that?" Ed lowered his voice even more. "James didn't tell you the whole truth, Kate. His father didn't die of a heart attack. He was poisoned." The shocking statement made Catherine stop abruptly. "That's absurd. Are you saying it was murder? There would have been an investigation." And there was, but the evidence was carefully manipulated. Victoria was at the center of it all, along with other executives who wanted to control the company. "And how do you know this?" Ed looked away. "Because I was part of the investor group that stood to benefit from the change in control. I didn't know about the poisoning at the time, I swear. I only found out recently when Victoria, drunk after a celebration, let it slip." Catherine felt nauseous at the implications. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because Victoria is going beyond forging documents to frame you, Kate. She's considering more definitive measures. For you and for James." "Are you suggesting she would plan to—" Catherine couldn't finish the sentence. The idea was too absurd. "I'm saying the woman was an accomplice to a serious crime once. Don't doubt what she would do to protect herself now." Ed took Catherine's hands. "You need to leave the country. I have contacts. I can arrange a safe place for you until this all blows over." Catherine pulled her hands away, taking a step back. Something wasn't right. The story was too sensational, too improbable. "Ed, this sounds like an attempt to scare me and get me away from the investigation." His expression hardened slightly. "I'm trying to protect you." "No, you're trying to manipulate me like you always have." Catherine took another step back. "I don't believe a word you've said." "Kate, please." Ed moved towards her. "You don't understand the gravity." "I understand perfectly," a familiar voice interrupted from behind Catherine. She turned, relieved to see James approaching with a serious expression. "I've heard enough, Ed. Your intimidation tactics won't work." Ed paled visibly. "They're not tactics. It's the truth. Your father was murdered, James, and the people responsible are still out there, some inside your own company." James maintained his composure, but Catherine saw how the mention of his father affected him. "My father suffered a heart attack, confirmed by multiple doctors. This absurd story is just another desperate attempt to create confusion." "Think what you want," Ed replied bitterly. "I'm trying to help." "Help who?" James questioned. "Victoria, who's desperate to hide her crimes, or yourself, since you're entangled in her schemes." Ed shook his head, a sad smile on his lips. "You two are blind. Thinking you're the heroes of this story, the defenders of truth and justice, but you don't realize you're being manipulated too, in ways you can't even imagine." "Enough with the games, Ed," Catherine said firmly. "If you have information about Victoria's embezzlement, share it now. Otherwise, this conversation is over." Ed looked from one to the other, as if weighing his options. Finally, he sighed in defeat. "The server I mentioned is real. It's in a private data center downtown. Victoria keeps all the real records there, protected by multiple layers of security." "And how would we get access?" James asked, still clearly skeptical. "You wouldn't. Not without my help." Ed took a small flash drive from his pocket. "Here are the access credentials and the address. I've also included copies of a few transactions I managed to extract as proof of good faith. Catherine hesitated before accepting the flash drive. How do we know there isn't a virus or malware on here? Because, despite what you think of me, I don't want to see Victoria win. Ed looked directly at Catherine. And because despite everything, what I felt for you was real. An uncomfortable silence followed the declaration. Finally, James took the flash drive. We'll have our digital security team check this before we use it. Do that, Ed agreed. But be quick. Victoria plans to make her move on Monday. As he walked away, Ed cast one last look at Catherine. Be careful, with everyone around you. When he had disappeared into the distance, Catherine released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Do you believe any of what he said? About the server and the records? Possibly. About the rest? James shook his head. My father was examined by specialists. There was no evidence of anything else. But Catherine saw the shadow of doubt in his eyes. I'm sorry he brought that up like that. It was cruel. It was calculated, James corrected. An attempt to destabilize me emotionally before the confrontation with Victoria. They started walking back towards the park exit. What are we going to do with the flash drive? Catherine asked. I'll deliver it personally to our head of digital security. If it's legitimate, it could be the evidence we need to stop Victoria before she launches her accusations against you. Catherine nodded, but a worry still lingered. What if there's some truth to the other things Ed said, about other people being involved, about Victoria being willing to go beyond forgery? James stopped, turning to face her directly. Catherine, I won't let anything happen to you, no matter what Victoria is planning. The intensity in his voice, the firmness of his promise, sent a shiver down Catherine's spine. It was more than a boss protecting an employee. It was a man promising to protect someone who had become far too important to him. We're in this together, she replied softly. And we'll face her together, whatever she's planning. The look they exchanged contained everything they hadn't yet said in words, the bond that had been strengthening between them, the connection that transcended the professional, the feeling that grew with every challenge they faced side by side. And as they left the park, they both knew that the final confrontation with Victoria would be just the first test of what they were building together, a partnership forged in chaos, born from an impulsive kiss and destined to transform not just a company, but their own lives. Sunday was a whirlwind of activity. The flash drive from Ed proved to be legitimate, containing the precise coordinates of Victoria's private server and access credentials that allowed Neotech AGI's digital security team to remotely access the files. What they found was more devastating than they had imagined. Meticulous records of embezzlement, totaling not just the $18 million initially discovered, but over $40 million over 3 years. There was also evidence that Victoria had not acted alone. Other executives were involved, including 2 still active members of the board. This is enough for a criminal prosecution, noted the company's chief counsel, reviewing the documents in an emergency meeting at James's Park Avenue penthouse. We can forward this to the FBI tomorrow morning. And what about her threat against Catherine? James asked, concern evident in his voice. Ed said she plans to launch false accusations tomorrow. Now we have the perfect antidote, the lawyer replied. If she tries anything, we'll respond immediately with the real evidence. It will be impossible for her to sustain any false narrative. Catherine, who was attending the meeting seated next to James, still felt uneasy. I don't think Victoria will simply give up when she realizes we have the proof. I agree, James said. She'll try something different. We need to be prepared for any scenario. After the meeting, once the professionals had left, Catherine and James remained on the spacious terrace of the penthouse, watching the sunset paint the New York sky orange and pink, reminiscent of that moment in Atlanta. Tomorrow will be a decisive day, James commented, pouring 2 glasses of wine. Catherine accepted the drink, her fingers briefly touching his in the exchange. I'm worried about what Victoria might do when she feels cornered. We've beaten her, Catherine. She knows it. That's exactly why I'm worried. People like Victoria are most dangerous when they have nothing left to lose. James watched her thoughtfully. Ed shook you with that story about my father, didn't he? Catherine hesitated. I don't believe your father was poisoned, if that's what you're asking. But I do believe Victoria is capable of extreme actions to protect herself. I never doubted that. James took a sip of wine, pensive. You know, when I regained control of the company, I was consumed by a desire for revenge. I wanted to make Victoria and the others pay for what they did to AGI, to my father's legacy. And now? Now I want justice, not revenge. I want to rebuild, not destroy. He looked directly at Catherine. And that's because of you. Her heart sped up at the intensity of his gaze. I just did my job. No, Catherine, you did much more than that. You reminded me that companies aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet or stocks on an exchange. They are people, lives, dreams. Like the Atlanta hub, she completed with a soft smile. Exactly. A project that honors my father's origins while creating real opportunities for real people. James set his glass down and moved slightly closer. That's the kind of legacy I want to build. And I want you by my side while we do it. The double meaning of those words, professional and personal, did not escape Catherine. I will be, she replied simply, feeling they were on the verge of something important, something transformative. James's phone rang, breaking the moment. He answered with a frustrated expression, but his face soon changed to one of concern. I understand. Yes, I'll take care of it immediately. When he hung up, his face was grave. That was the head of security. Someone tried to remotely access Neotech's central servers. They specifically targeted files related to the Atlanta hub. Victoria? Probably. The team blocked the access, but it's a clear sign she hasn't given up. James stood up, tense. I think you should stay here tonight, Catherine. For safety. I don't think that's necessary, she replied, though the offer was tempting for reasons that went beyond security. My apartment has 24-hour security and... Please, James interrupted, genuine worry in his eyes. I'd rest easier knowing you're safe. Something in the vulnerability of that request touched Catherine deeply. All right, she finally agreed. But I'll need to stop by my place to get a few things. Of course, I'll have the driver take us. At Catherine's apartment, James waited in the living room while she packed clothes and essentials for the night. Observing her personal space, the books organized by color on the shelf, the photos of her family in simple frames, the well-tended plants on the balcony, James felt increasingly connected to the woman who had transformed his life with an impulsive kiss. Back at the penthouse, a housekeeper showed Catherine to the guest room, large and elegant, with a view of the illuminated garden terrace. After a light dinner prepared by the in-house chef, Catherine retired to rest, though anticipation for the next day made sleep difficult. Around midnight, restless, she decided to go downstairs for a glass of water. In the darkened hallway, a faint light from the study caught her attention. She approached silently and saw James sitting behind his desk, analyzing documents with a tense expression. "Can't sleep either?" she asked softly. James looked up, surprised. "Catherine, I'm sorry if the light bothered you." "It didn't. I'm the one who can't stop thinking about tomorrow." He indicated a nearby armchair. "Care for some company in your insomnia?" Catherine smiled, accepting the invitation. "What are you analyzing so late?" "The final details for the Atlanta hub. The official inauguration is set for the end of the month, regardless of what happens with Victoria tomorrow." "It will be a success," Catherine stated with conviction. "We already have interested startups, confirmed mentors, the local government offering tax incentives. All thanks to your tireless work," James completed, a glint of admiration in his eyes. "Our work," she corrected. "It was your vision that started it all." A comfortable silence settled between them, the kind of silence that only exists between people who understand each other deeply, beyond words. Finally, James spoke. "Do you know what impresses me most about you, Catherine?" "What?" "Your ability to turn impulse into strength. That kiss at the St. Regis Grand could have been just a moment of anger, a small revenge against Ed, but you transformed that impulse into a journey of self-discovery and renewal." Catherine reflected on his words. It was true. That impulsive moment had become a turning point in her life, the start of a transformation she could never have predicted. "I never imagined that kissing a stranger in a bar would bring me here," she admitted with a smile. "And I never imagined that being kissed by a stranger would so fundamentally change my perspective on life," James replied, returning the smile. Their eyes met, and this time there were no interruptions, no ringing phones or imminent crises, just two human beings acknowledging the extraordinary connection they had built amidst the chaos. James rose slowly and walked around the desk, approaching her. Catherine stood as well, her heart racing in anticipation. "Catherine," he began, his voice softer than she had ever heard it, "I know the timing might seem strange with everything that's happening, but I need to say something before tomorrow arrives." She waited, almost breathless. "That kiss at the St. Regis Grand may have started our story, but that's not how I want it to continue. Not as a fluke, An impulse, a coincidence of fate. James took another step, closing nearly all the distance between them. I want what comes next to be a conscious choice. For both of us. I want that too, Catherine whispered, finally admitting to him and to herself what had been growing in her heart for the past few weeks. With a gentleness that contrasted with his usual business-like firmness, James touched Catherine's face, his fingers softly tracing the line of her cheek. She closed her eyes briefly, feeling the warmth of his touch. When their lips finally met, it was not with the impulsiveness of that first time at the St. Regis Grand, but with the quiet certainty of someone who has finally found their way home after a long journey. The kiss deepened, revealing feelings they had both kept hidden for too long. When they finally parted, they remained with their foreheads touching, sharing the same air, the same space, the same perfect moment. So no matter what happens tomorrow, James murmured, we'll face it together. The next morning they arrived at Neotech AGI as a united front. The night they had shared, with conversations until dawn, more kisses, whispered plans for the future, had solidified something between them. A partnership that transcended the professional and the personal to become something entirely new. The chief counsel was already waiting for them with news. We just received a notification. Victoria has called an emergency board meeting for 10 a.m. The official topic is irregularities in the current management. As expected, James commented. Is everything ready for our response? Yes. We have the evidence organized, the FBI on standby, and statements prepared for the press and shareholders. At 9:45 a.m., James and Catherine headed to the boardroom on the top floor. The board members were already arriving, including the two who, according to the evidence, were involved in the embezzlement with Victoria. Mr. Allen, Ms. Myers, one of them, Walter Campbell, a senior executive who had worked with James's father, greeted them coldly. A surprise to see you here so early. We figured it would be important to be present, considering the topic of the meeting, James replied with equal coolness. At 10 a.m. sharp, Victoria entered the room accompanied by Ed. Both seemed momentarily destabilized to see Catherine and James already there, but Victoria quickly regained her composure, taking her seat at the table with calculated confidence. Board members, she began without preamble, I have called this meeting to present alarming evidence regarding the current management of Neotech AGI. James remained impassive, watching her unfold her carefully constructed narrative about supposed embezzlement to offshore accounts linked to Catherine. The accusations were serious, the forgeries impressively detailed. When Victoria finally concluded, looking triumphantly at Catherine as if already savoring her destruction, James rose calmly. I thank Ms. Price for her creative presentation, he said with controlled irony. Now, if you will allow me, I would like to present some additional facts that shed a completely different light on this situation. What followed was a systematic demolition of Victoria's accusations. With surgical precision, James and the chief counsel presented the real evidence of the embezzlement, including documents signed by Victoria herself, authorizing transfers to shell companies. As you can see, James concluded, Ms. Price not only embezzled over $40 million from this company over the last 3 years, but she is now attempting to cover up her crimes by falsely accusing my advisor. The color had drained from Victoria's face, replaced by a deathly pallor. Ed, beside her, looked equally stunned. This is a sham, she protested weakly. This evidence has been fabricated. Interestingly, it was Mr. Reynolds who provided us with access to your private server, James retorted. Apparently, he has more of a conscience than one might think. Ed avoided Victoria's furious glare, fixing his eyes on the table in front of him. Mr. Campbell and Mr. Ferreira also feature extensively in the documentation, James continued, indicating the two implicated board members, who now looked as if they wanted to disappear into their chairs. The FBI has already been notified and should be arriving at any moment. As if summoned by James's words, federal agents entered the room, led by a senior agent who formally informed them that Victoria Price was being taken in for questioning regarding serious allegations of embezzlement and attempted fraud. As Victoria was escorted out, she shot one last venomous look at Catherine. This isn't over, she hissed. You don't know who you're dealing with. Catherine held her gaze without flinching. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Victoria, and I'm not afraid. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Statements to the police, press releases, calls with nervous shareholders. At the end of the day, exhausted but victorious, Catherine and James finally had a moment alone in his office. We did it. she said with a sigh of relief. Thanks to you, James replied, taking her hands in his. Your insight in identifying the inconsistencies from the start, your courage in facing her even when she tried to destroy your reputation. It was a team effort, Catherine corrected. And we still have a lot to do. The company needs to recover from this scandal. The Atlanta hub needs to be launched as planned. James smiled, gently touching her face. Always focused on the next step. It's one of the things I admire most about you. One of the things, she teased with a slight smile. The list is long, he replied, leaning in for a brief kiss. And we have all the time in the world to explore it. 3 weeks later, Catherine walked through the newly inaugurated space of the Southern Innovation Hub in the heart of Atlanta's Tech Square. The place was buzzing with energy and enthusiasm as young entrepreneurs pitched their startups to potential investors and mentors. Impressive, isn't it? James said, approaching with 2 glasses of sparkling wine from a family-owned vineyard in Napa Valley. In just 1 month, we already have 20 startups incubated and 3 investment rounds confirmed. Catherine accepted the glass, looking around with genuine pride. It's more than impressive. It's transformative. After Victoria's downfall, the restructuring of Neotech AGI had been intense but productive. The executives involved in the embezzlement were removed, new talent was promoted, and the corporate culture was completely reshaped around values of transparency and social impact. I have something to show you, James said, guiding her to a quieter area of the hub, away from the crowd celebrating the inauguration. On a discreet wall near the entrance, a metal plaque shone under the light. The Matthew Allen Foundation for Social Innovation, in memory of the man who left Atlanta to build an empire, but never forgot his roots. Catherine's eyes welled up as she read the inscription. It's beautiful, James. Your father would be so proud. There's more, he said, visibly emotional. He pressed a discreet button, and a curtain slid open, revealing a second plaque beside the first. The Catherine Myers Fund for Women Entrepreneurs, dedicated to women who turn impulse into strength. Catherine brought a hand to her lips, genuinely surprised. James, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, he replied, wrapping her in a hug. Just accept it. This project is as much yours as it is mine, maybe more so. When they pulled apart, their eyes locked. James continued. You know what I've realized these past few weeks, Catherine. That sometimes the biggest mistakes, like that maneuver that pushed me out of the presidency, or the moment Ed betrayed you, can lead to the greatest successes, like an impulsive kiss with a stranger in the middle of a fancy bar, she suggested with a smile. Exactly, James laughed. Without that moment of despair and anger, we might never have truly met. We would never have built this. He gestured around them, indicating not just the physical hub, but everything they had created together, a renewed company, impactful projects, and a relationship built on mutual respect and genuine admiration. Something beautiful came from the chaos, Catherine agreed. And we're just getting started, James said, his eyes shining with plans and promises for the future. The Matthew Allen Foundation and the Catherine Myers Fund are just the beginning. I envision similar hubs all over the country, support networks for vulnerable communities, projects that truly transform lives. Always dreaming big, Catherine observed fondly. I learned from you how to turn dreams into concrete projects, he replied. We make a good team, don't you think? The best, Catherine agreed, sealing the statement with a kiss. In the distance, camera flashes captured the moment. The powerful businessman and his partner, now officially a couple, celebrating not just the opening of a business project, but the beginning of a shared journey. This time, however, Catherine didn't care about the photos or what people would say. She had learned that the truth of her feelings was stronger than any external narrative. A year later, the Southern Innovation Hub had become a success story studied in international business schools. The model combining profitability with social impact had proven not only viable, but extremely lucrative. Neotech AGI had expanded into new areas, always maintaining the values that James and Catherine had established together. On a sunny afternoon, on the same Atlanta rooftop where they had shared that almost moment months before, James finally asked the question he had been rehearsing for weeks. Kneeling with the sunset painting the sky in the same intense colors as that day, he offered Catherine not just a ring, but a promise to build a future together, where impulse transformed into strength, where mistakes led to successes, and where love was born from even the most unlikely moments. And Catherine, the woman who had once kissed a stranger in an act of desperation, now said yes to the same man in an act of absolute certainty. Because in the end, they both understood that true love is not born from perfection, but from the courage to be imperfect. From chaos, a union was born that overcame judgment, inequality, and ambition. And it all began with an impulse, the kiss that defied the world and redeemed two destinies. On the end.